elite group of people representing Willits Frontier Days and some of the history we've seen and experienced over the last few decades. I'm blessed to be with several past presidents, Rick Crowder, Chuck Persico, Lee Persico, and Annette Pinon, and our friend Chris Neary, who never took the helm of the organization but knows a lot about what we've done in the past. And we're not getting to have a rodeo this year,
Right.
so we'd like to talk a little bit about what we've done before and some of the fun things we've experienced.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because of the coronavirus situation that we've had to postpone Frontier Days, and hopefully things will loosen up by October and we can concentrate more on our ranch rodeo, which we've been working on for several years, and hopefully that's going to work out. However, won't know for a couple of months, but anyway, my history of going back to Frontier Days and my brothers, I can remember on Mother's Day, it seemed every year when the old rodeo grounds, Mother's Day was the start, so all of our parents and people that were involved would be down at the rodeo grounds. We'd be cutting the grass and burning up the brush and what have you. In fact, one year I remember that the fire got away from us and we almost burnt down the entire arena, which was wood at that time. But and you could imagine seeing a bunch of gentlemen that had a few cocktails and with wet burlap sacks trying to put out the fire because that's all we had. But anyway, that goes back to about 1951, maybe 48, somewhere along in there. But anyway, that was one of my first recollections, other than being involved with it since I was born. 2 years old, or well, actually, I rode in the parade when I was about 6 months or eight months. I don't remember now.
Well, your dad was a past president.
Oh yeah, my dad was past president. So was I think your mother. Wasn't your mother a past president?
I don't know if she was ever a president.
She wasn't president, but she started the Sweetheart Committee.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
She
Yeah.
wrote the original rules, which most of them are in play today
Exactly.
for the Sweetheart Contest,
Right.
which without it, some days we wouldn't be able to pay the bills.
You know, she was fascinated by the Sweetheart Contest. You know, when we moved here in 1950, she got involved in Frontier Days right away and pushed my sister Joan to be a sweetheart. I think she was at 54 or 55. And so she was always fascinated by my good friend Danny McBride's daughter, Christina, was born like in the early 80s or something. And my mother was pushing her from the day she was born to be ready to be sweetheart, which eventually she was a sweetheart, Christine McBride. But the Sweetheart Contest was always dear to her heart. And actually, Frontier Days, she came up here from Los Angeles and had been sort of traveled like as a young lady in society circles. And so moving to Willits in 1950 was a big lifestyle change for her. And, I think in many ways, I don't think she would have lasted very long had it not been for Frontier Days, because she became fascinated with it. One of my very first memories is riding down Main Street, Jeep pulling us, and it had a paper mache elephant, and it said, put a new trunk in the White House.
Yes.
I like Ike.
That's right. I forgot Barbara was very
She was a
political.
Republican,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, right.
With my mother, they were on
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I'd like to introduce Kathy Goss. She didn't introduce herself. She is a past president also.
Thanks,
You
Patricia.
didn't introduce yourself. I guess you
I
did.
hate doing
No,
that. I
she
like to be
didn't.
anonymous,
Mine cannot be
I started
anonymous.
with Frontier Days announcing the parade. That Bob Runnings announced our parade for years, and he was not doing as well as he wanted someone to help him with it because he had a script.
Yes, he did.
He was not as charming as he was. He didn't do anything extemporaneous at all. He had a script, and if he was reading the script and Rick Crowder was the next rider on a horse, he would go on and on about how nice Rick Crowder looked. when it was actually Annette Pinon on her mother's horse, because he couldn't
never
ad
rode
lib
a
at
horse
all.
He didn't ad lib very well at
No.
all, I can
So
tell
I
you.
started out being his little helper, like jabbing him in the ribs and said, "That's not Rick Crowder. First of all, she's wearing a dress." But that's how I started Frontier Days.
Well, you never know.
And
Rick
then
could have wore a
I was
dress.
the past
No.
president that nominated her for presidency, so.
Well, I'll
Remember
tell you
that?
how I got
got really
I'm
involved.
probably the youngest guy here because I came in 1969. I'm sure everybody's probably in 69 or 70. I'm not really sure. The fellow that's sitting in the middle there saw me working some cattle in a corral and said, "I think I need you to come and help me with the junior rodeo. I need people to help move cattle around." And I got there and still here for the most part. Never got away. And it's funny that you mentioned about burning the grounds down. I think you'll remember. I don't know which one of you was president, or maybe it was Jack at the time. We hauled a bunch of sawdust in, and we were going to mix it in the dirt to kind of fluffen it up a little bit because it would get hard. And that was the same year or the next year that we started putting pipe corrals in. And
Oh, the welding.
with pipe comes torches and grinders. And so we worked out there one Saturday, I guess, and I don't know what day it was, but it was one day, and we worked along, and we decided it was time to go home, so we left, and we made sure there was no fires. We had water there, and we made sure there was no fires, and we left. We come back the next day, and that little hot spark had got in that sawdust, and there was probably half of that rodeo grounds where the sawdust was all black and charred. It had burnt all night long. It's a wonder it didn't take off. I have no idea what saved it. But there was black spots all over the back of that, where all the chutes, where all the pins are now. It was all burnt. We've lived through some unique times.
For me, the group, it's an interesting group of people that come together to put this organization on. I mean, it's 95 years this year, and the board, I think, has 13 members, and then there are committees that probably have another 15 people that chair those at different events. But they're all from different walks of life. All the volunteers down at the rodeo grounds are people from the phone company and people who own fuel companies and insurance companies, and every day, weeks before the 4th of July after work, they congregate down there, and somebody's mowing and somebody's weeding and somebody's fixing corrals. And I don't think if it were that organization, you'd see those people together. That, for me, that was the best part of it, is working alongside people that I would never normally have known before, except for Frontier Days.
It seems like Frontier Days is really the essence of the social fabric of Willits. I mean, it's basically our common cultural heritage, and it's what makes our town a little bit different. When the bypass was about ready to go in, some people from Cloverdale came up to say, to give their experiences of how they reacted to being bypassed by the freeway, and they said, well, you got to come up with a theme, and your obvious theme is Frontier Days and the old Wild West, because that's, they had a delegation up here for about a week. When you think of something 95 years old, you go back, and one of the things that always fascinated me about Frontier Days was how some characters became involved in it. And one of my parents' close friends was Don and Petey Coleman, and they used to come out for a drink, pull up in their big Imperial about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We have a bar in our house, and they'd sit around and drink and tell stories. And Don Coleman was an interesting character. He was a bareback champion up in Montana or something, and then he
Miles City.
at Miles City Road. I've got photographs of the Miles City Roundup with Don in it, and then he broke horses for the Army during World War I. Then he ended up in Hollywood, and just about every old silent Western will have Don in it. And he starred in a few, but after he made a bunch of movies, he created a Wild West show, and he contracted to come up to Willits in the 30s, and he never left. He and because so he was a big fixture in the early years of Frontier Days, and it all started with his Wild West show. Apparently, they used to travel around, but he came to Willits and he just never left.
And he was, wasn't he a model for
The statue.
the statue for was it Buffalo Bill?
Right.
Yeah, he was the model. That's right.
He and Petey sponsored a perpetual trophy with
Right.
the Force Show, the
Right.
Mill Iron Trophy,
The Mill Iron.
which
Mill
now is still sponsored. It's still
Right. Well, it's still called the Mill Iron Trophy, but it's sponsored by the Clark family in memory of Randy
Randy,
Clark.
yeah.
Well, and that's when Petey and Don, when Chuck was president and I was secretary, and Jack was the horse show guy anyway, and we started the perpetual trophies, and Barbara sponsors one in her
Yeah,
memory.
yeah,
You sponsored
yeah.
one in her memory.
Sunnybrook Ranch.
Sunnybrook Ranch,
Sunnybrook Ranch,
and then the Goss family sponsors one, and then there's
Hawthorne?
Hawthorne Morgan is the English one, and then there's another one.
Joan Craighead.
Joan Craighead. Seems like there's another one.
I'm going down the.
I know.
program.
I have them in my garage.
And then one of them was Suttles, but that was for
But
the,
that
That's
was
a
for
junior
the
rodeo.
rodeo.
junior rodeo.
Yeah,
So there's been
yeah.
some
There-
perpetual
lots of
trophies.
perpetual trophies. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but Don and Petey, I have a picture of my daughter who won their trophy, them standing there by her with her little chocolate horse. And that's a very special one because, yeah.
I can't remember. It wasn't long before they passed that we honored them. I don't remember if they were Heritage Award winners or
Or
what.
was it probably
went through
several.
But they-
parade.
The parade.
They
yeah.
drove them out
marches.
into the arena in that big convertible.
Right.
Was it a Cadillac or a big white convertible? Oh my
Well,
God.
when we were the Frontier Days, they'd drive up to the gate, and you'd open the gate, and they could drive in.
Yes.
You didn't question it; you just did it.
No rules.
No
back then.
rules.
Very
They
cool.
don't, they don't have all those rules that they had, but they drove in and they got out, and then they went anyway.
When I was a kid, we used to go up to their ranch
Mm-hmm.
also, and I as vividly I can remember this. I must have been 8 or 9 years old. One time, Don took me into this room we had there, and he says, "You see this saddle? He says, that's Jesse James's saddle." And he says, "See this gun? This was Jesse James's gun." And he told me the story of how Petey's father, in Northfield, Minnesota, that's where she was from. It was a very famous. Any Jesse James movie you'll see, you'll have the Northfield
Northfield,
raid.
right.
You know, this when they went up to there because it was a Union general that owned the bank, and they wanted to rob it. And as they were, and the story is all verified through the history books, is that they were making their getaway, and somebody shot Jesse James's horse out from him, and his brother Frank grabbed him up, and he dropped his gun, and his horse had been shot, and Petey's father, who was just about a teenager at the time, got Jesse James's saddle and gun, and Don had it, and I think it went back to Northfield after they died to a museum.
Wow.
But I mean, when you're 9 years old and somebody pulls out Jesse James's gun, it's
It's a big deal.
a big deal.
Well, when I had my surplus store back in the day, he used to bring it in, and I used to have it in the front window up there on display. And that's
Well,
it.
in my building.
Yeah, yeah.
We
yeah,
decorated
right,
those
exactly.
days. And before the 4th of
Before
July,
the
there was
4th of July,
a chamber sponsored a contest, and all the
Windows were painted. Yeah.
and decorated
And
with
decorated
all old
inside.
stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The other thing that I remember, and it's been long gone, and you couldn't do it today because of vandalism, unfortunately, but about a month before the 4th, they would bring old stagecoaches and wagons and set them on all of the main street on the corners, and people would come by and they'd sit in them, pose in them, and take pictures and what have you. And I believe some of those ended up down here in the museum. It was that was quite a sight. And then, of course, when Frontier Days was just getting going, the Willits Hotel had the famous bar Al's in the corner,
Yeah, Al's
and
right.
that's over here where the parking lot is now. And as a small child, we lived in an apartment behind the Travelers Hotel, and my dad was being very involved with the rodeo and what have you. And so the headquarters for the rodeo was held in the Van Hotel across the way. That was the headquarters, but they set up a full set of gambling in the bar at Al's, and they had roulette tables, blackjack, the whole 9 yards, and the town was basically wide open, and people came from all over just to gamble. And then my good friend Reno Bartolome decided that that was too much, and he came and shut us down. And I think that was in 1944, 45, about 46. And he was the sheriff at the time, so that enough was enough. But I don't even remember where all these people came from, but they brought actually gambling tables, dice tables, blackjack tables, roulette, the whole 9 yards. Yeah.
When I first got involved on the board with Frontier Days, I was trying to figure out a way, because we're forever trying to raise money to put on these different things. I was trying to figure out a tangible way to prove to this community that a big amount of money comes into us. So every year at that time, it's been a while, we would start out the holiday weekend with a change bank. So $10,000. We would go to Bank of Willits and pick up this money in 1s and 5s and 10s, and then that would be the change for all the different events. Well, I came up with this idea to have these stickers made that said Cowboy Cash, and they were like the size of a quarter, and we got our change bank a day early, and we sat there, Ruth Burris and I and several others sat there and put stickers on every bill in the change bank. So proud of myself, because now we're going to watch this money track through the community, and we can prove to our supporters how you benefit. Eddie Scott sells a washing machine. Half of it was paid with Cowboy Cash. Great idea. Until the day after the 4th of July, when Becky Brown called, and she said, "Who came up with the idea to put the stickers
To
on the
face
bills?"
the currency.
And I said, "Oh, wasn't that a great idea?" And she said, "Actually, no." She said, as it goes through the automatic counting machine, it was peeling the stickers off and sticking to other stuff, which clogged up the machine, and the Bank of Willits was not amused. They were the longest supporter of Frontier Days, the first one to pay an ad every year, the first one to give us money. And Johnny Pitches used to announce the junior rodeo.
Yeah,
You remember this day.
Oh, yeah.
So Johnny's up there, and he's a great ad-libber, and he's announcing stuff, and during the junior rodeo, we have a mystery scramble, and this year it was chickens, a bunch of chickens. They let them out in the arena, and all the kids run around, chase them, and everybody's happy except the parents, who have to figure out what to do with the chicken. So as this is all going on, Johnny announces over the public address system, "Hey, Orville Archer just called me and said any kid who brings a chicken to the bank on Monday will give him $5. Well, Rebecca Brown was not amused.
Well, he wasn't amused either. Yeah, right.
I'd see him looking down.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was.
Yeah.
I forgot all about that. I remember that.
Yeah.
I remember
I think
that.
we all caught a little hell on that one.
Oh boy, it's just your days with a microphone in your hand announcing different events, and lack of sleep, a little bit of alcohol, a lot of dirt, and you say things that sometimes just slip out.
Exactly. You know what?
Well-
If you think about this, what's really amazing about this organization is that when it started in 1929, and it was started 26. Started with Dean Weber and Bill Whitney, and I think Dr. Babcock was involved with it. Dr. Babcock was pretty famous around here as one of our first physicians, and very good friend of Charlie Howard with Seabiscuit. But anyway, there's pictures of them in a car. I think it was Dean Wimmer that was in the car with or maybe it was, Dr. Babcock, but one of them, and Wimmer's standing on one side and Whitney's on the horse on the other one. I don't know if you've seen that picture. I think I've got it somewhere. But anyway, and the thing about that is how it started, and it's a non-profit, and none of us have ever made a nickel on this thing. And as Kathy and these other people have said, that it's a grouping that gets together once a year. We look forward to it, even though it's a lot of work. It's all donated, but to think about how this thing has progressed as a non-profit in this day and age is really overwhelming, and I think it's something to be really kind of epitomized because of the way things are today, everybody's in it for themselves. But actually, our whole thought and belief with Frontier Days has been for the benefit of the Willits and the citizens and the businesses. And I know that it's certainly helped all the motels and the bars and the restaurants and for years. And for this thing to keep going as basically a freebie, when you think about it,
Right.
the labor, the amount of labor and donations that come from other businesses is just overwhelming. And it's in this day and age, it's few and far between, I think.
Well, it started out to benefit the hospital.
Right.
Exactly.
And if you think about, I was just over at the hospital and getting some blood work done. It's hard to believe that hospital is in Willits.
Right.
I mean it is a first class setup, you know, and Frontier Days basically was one of the original sponsors of you know, I mean, of course Charlie Howard was involved in that, but Frontier Days was sort of set up to get it, you know, all furnished and get the equipment. So, you know, and you know what we have over there now is a hospital, but basically it's, you know, sort of the heart
World class.
World class.
heart and soul
Exactly.
of this community.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, you know, I mean,
Exactly.
it is. In fact, it may be the catalyst for a whole new, you know, industry here. You know, because you know, we're sort of running out of industries here. You know, and so the medical field looks like it's going to be a big deal here. You know, doctors, you know, are, you know, they've got that place fully staffed. You know, it's just, you know, it's just a wonder to behold.
To go a little step farther on that, I've had several surgeries at the old hospital. Had both my knees replaced, but they send a survey out and you mark it all off. And the last time that I looked online, about a year or so ago, Howard Hospital is still one of the top-rated small hospitals in the United States.
I
And
think
they've
I
got
think
that's
some great
amazing.
there's something like there's some star rating system or something.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And they're within the top
Yeah,
4% in the country
Yeah.
or
Yes,
something like
they're-
that.
right. Exactly.
it's great to have a hospital here, and you think that part of Frontier's got that started. Frontier Days got that
There
started.
again, you would have to go back to Dr. Babcock because of his friendship with Charlie Howard, and everybody knows the history of how this all started with about the hospital, was that young Frank Howard was in a very serious wreck on the ranch down here at the Seabiscuit Ranch, or the Ridgewood Ranch, and he passed away to his to the problem, to his injuries, and Dr. Babcock told Charlie Howard that if we'd had a hospital, he may have been able to save him, and that started the foundation, and that's how Dr. Babcock benefited for Frontier Days and
They came
Charlie
up with the
Howard
idea. I think they came up with the idea
So
to put a hospital in, and Charlie Howard is the one that bought the property and built that.
You know, you talk about a picture. The picture that always impressed me is Lee sitting on Seabiscuit.
yeah.
You know, how many people can say that they sat on Seabiscuit?
But I don't remember too much.
Well, I'm going to get back to something that Kathy said about the unique people that come together here. I'm probably one of the few people that for less than probably 3 years I've lived in this community. I've lived most of my career in Ukiah, and I lived in Humboldt County, and I married a local lady. Her family still lives in the valley, but there's a lot of families that are represented right here that are the foundations of a lot of things that are going on, that have helped through blood, sweat, and tears. And like Kathy said earlier, there's a lot of dirt, there's a lot of sleepless nights. Someplace in my can of worms, I have a picture of myself sleeping on the concrete slab next to the existing office there, with a sledgehammer for a pillow. That was like 37 hours. We had been up, and that was the year that we did the Ricky Skaggs show. We had to set up the arena, we had to finish the stage, drag it in, set it up, and set the trailers up, get all that set. The sound came in and wired it all up. We had the concert. When it was over with at midnight or whatever time it was, we got to tear all of that stuff out and drag it all out of there and get ready for a horse show the next morning at 8 o'clock. And we had been going for, I think we figured it out, it was like 35 or 36 hours when we finally said, okay, there's your horse show arena, we're going to go to sleep.
It's not uncommon because the 4th of July, our event's always on the 3rd and the 4th.
Right.
And it changes the day of the week every year, so you
Yep.
don't know if it's going to be a Monday or a Thursday. This year I think it's Saturday. But you have to plan this schedule. When can you have the junior rodeo? When can you sponsor the horse shows or the sweetheart dinner? It's every year you've got to look at the schedule and figure out how it fit best to embrace the most of the community. But the people, the committee, who might be 20 people at the most, physically do all the work.
That's
So
a true
they
statement.
start at 8 o'clock in the morning with the horse show, and that night is a street dance. They don't finish until 2 in the morning, and they've got to be back again at 6 the next morning. And
Yeah, very
it
true.
happens a lot. It's
Yeah.
it happens a lot.
I mentioned at one time I retired from the phone company, and as a telephone, they have an organization that's a civic organization. It's called the Telephone Company Pioneers, and they decided that they wanted to keep track of all the community service hours that their members put in, and I think Kathy was involved. I think the year that I was president, I stopped counting, and we still hadn't made it to the 4th of July. I was looking at like over 600 hours, and I didn't live in the community, so I wasn't here all the time because I was over the hill in Ukiah or I was someplace else. I can't even imagine if you sat here and started adding the hours that all this group has put together, the thousands of hours. I mean, your
And our
daughter,
families.
your daughter was the sweetheart when I was the president. Dina was my sweetheart.
Right, right.
So I mean, there's a lot of history here that's it's pretty unique. It's really unique. It's like I said earlier, I live mainly in Ukiah. I was in Humboldt County for 4 years. I used to come down and spend a week at my mother-in-law's house and work here at Frontier Days. It's really unique to come together and see this kind of org. Everybody thinks I'm from Willits. Everybody I run into said, well, what's going on in Willits? I don't know. I live in Ukiah. But I connect with this community for some reason or another, and I think it's because of the people. I mean, I don't know how many hours I spent with your husband. Many hours
Right.
down there. Sizemore. I have pictures of me and Wayne Sizemore stirring spaghetti because we had a chamber mixer, and we're stirring spaghetti. And we'd been on the tractor earlier, but it was spaghetti night, so we polished up what we could and we started mixing spaghetti. I mean, I can remember your Patricia making raviolis at her house. We made like 400 dozen.
Yeah.
I
all
can't
on a
remember.
Sunday.
We did it all one day.
Yep.
And it was it's tough to find a community that has the people, and I credit you folks because you live here, but that has the glue and the people to keep this thing going. And we've got not to take away from the board that we have now. We've got a lot of young, I call them young,
They
they're
are
like
young.
They are young.
my children's age.
They are young.
But we have a lot of young folks that are committed to doing some things there, and it's good because I don't know about the rest of you, but my body is gone, and I'm not used to. I don't know how many hours I spent in that tractor, going around in that arena, doing this and that and everything, and I can't do that anymore. So we looking forward all the time to find new, and that's why we've not too recently in the past, a couple, 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, we formed a junior group, and we now have a young group that comes down and helps with setting up at the sweetheart dinner. They help in the cook booth. They come and they do some things that do take care of some of the labor that us old folks can't do anymore.
But to address that, when we were in it, our kids were part of it.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
true.
We
Very
raised
true.
our kids.
We raised
Very
our
true.
kids there.
Your mother
and
was in it, and you
my
were.
mother was
Yeah.
in it. I was
Yeah,
in it.
right.
My grandfather was the first secretary
Yeah.
of the organization,
You know,
and it's family. It's about family.
Yeah, that's-
and
I-
now it's that's the way it was. You know, you
Yeah.
didn't do anything at your house. Your family was at the rodeo grounds.
That's exactly right.
And John-
Probably one of the most
Yeah.
fun
I
things
mean-
I do in the horse show is look out there and see how many past sweethearts
Yeah.
are
Yeah.
coming
Yeah.
back
Yeah.
and helping.
Right.
Yeah.
I
They're
mean,
judging the horse show. They're heading up a raffle. They're and they're
Very true.
20 years
And-
past.
and that's what
And
it's all about. It's
That's
the
what
family.
it's about. The family and the sweethearts that have come back and helped. I mean,
Yeah.
you can, there's Nikki and there's Dina and there's Matt.
Well, I
and
mean,
you go down the list.
I know all of your kids. I know all of your kids. I know all of your kids. And I know all of your kids.
my
Chris, I don't.
my youngest son,
This I don't know.
Tim.
Really
Very
get
well.
to meet my granddaughter. She'll be a sweetheart, I'm sure. She's hitting me up for
But
a
I mean,
horse right now. Yeah.
My youngest son learned how to weld from Jack Tharp.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he learned how to drive a tractor. I remember coming home from work one day, but we had the circus
Goes around
that was
circle.
coming to town, and they were going to be across the street where the old airport used to be, now
Right.
that Roots of Motive Power are. And the grader was working. And as I'm driving by, I realized there's nobody in that grader, and it's working. So I stop the car, and I walk over to the gate thinking, what in the heck is going on? My son was in there. I think he was 9.
Yeah.
Jack wired a block to the pedal so he could reach it, and he said, "Just go back and forth. Just keep going back and forth."
You know?
And that's how he learned how to run equipment.
Tim learned to drive from me. I taught him how to drive some of it because we used to pick up hay out by where the substation is, out in the valley. And I mean, he couldn't reach the pedals.
Right.
So I would wad up my jacket and put books in there, and I'd put it in low range and low gear, and I'd say, okay, when I tell you to go, just start it. And it would take off, and when I'd holler to stop, he'd shut it off, and he drove around, and when you were walking around, you couldn't see but about this much
I know.
above the window.
Well, I think all our kids
Yeah.
learned.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's
They
where we all
they
learned to drive.
to haul hay and do all that.
Yeah.
It's hard to find kids now.
Yeah, it's hard to find. That's very true. Very true. But we didn't have cell phones, and we didn't have internet, and we didn't have computers, and we didn't have all that stuff to take their mind away. I mean, every one of us grew up down there, basically. We've all spent time down. And speaking of growing up, you got some stuff here that you brought
Well,
along
we,
that you were telling me about earlier.
We trick rode our whole life, our beginning of our life. Lee was the world's youngest trick rider, and we trick rode at Frontier Days for several years. This buckle was given to Lee and I. He has an identical one. This buckle was given to us in 1950, and it was for I'd been trick riding for 6 years. You'd been longer than that, of course. And this was when his compliments of Willits Frontier Days, July 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. So it was a 3-day show in 1950. So anyway, I brought the buckle in. The rope I have here was when Lee and I were trick riding at one of the other rodeos that we used to go to. A clown brought this over and gave us this. He heard of us, knew us, saw us, knew our dad,
It was Zeke Bowery.
Zeke Bauer, and he came over and he says, I want to give this to the boys. And I've kept it all these years and never used it, but it's a lead rope. You can make a lead rope out of it. It was always stiff. I'm sure you still have yours too.
Somewhere.
But
Somewhere.
anyway, back to Don Coleman. Don Coleman is one of the major reasons why Willits is the oldest continuous rodeo in California. It's not the oldest rodeo, but it's the oldest continuous rodeo. And the reason was during the war, in the 40s, 1942, 41, 43, in there, when the war was still going, they couldn't get any cowboys. They could get a stock contractor, but they couldn't get any cowboys. So what good would the whole rodeo do if you didn't have any cowboys? So Don Coleman said, I'll take care of that. And he called all of his stuntmen that he was friends with down in Hollywood, and they came up and put the rodeo on. So they were the contestants. And that's how Willits kept the continuation of the oldest continuous rodeo in California.
Actually, it would be Salinas would be the oldest, but they were
Salinas.
dormant during the
The war.
war years.
They had to skip a year.
One thing that I'll throw out now that
14
we're,
also skipped.
the current,
Yeah.
the current board is still working at the grounds, even though we're social distancing and doing all the things that are correct. We're in the process of rebuilding one of the rooms down there, and some years back, I guess it's been a couple of years ago, the museum had a pile, for lack of a better term, of half-round logs that apparently came from Don Coleman someplace.
The barn,
The old barn.
the barn behind the place that the
It
sheriff's
was
office.
stacked up at
The county.
the museum, and the museum, it was donated to the museum years ago, I guess, to do something with, and it sat under a tarp out there for many years. The curator here, I want to say a year or two ago, came over and asked us if there was something we could do. And to continue on with Don Coleman, that building will be sited, or that's the plans right now, with all that old barnwood is
How
going to go
cool
on
is
the
that?
outside of that new building that we're going to put, which will be just adjacent to the cook shack. We had to tear that building down. And just as we were speaking about fire earlier, I was talking to one of the guys that tore it down. They said, we don't even know how it didn't burn down because there was about that much exposed wire that was still hot laid up on top. It's so wonder we didn't burn that down. So that's going to be fixed, and we're going to have a new building there. And it's going to continue with stuff from Don Coleman, Heritage. So that's a kind of an awful lot about what Frontier Days is about, a lot of heritage.
You know, I think back of some of the almost tragedy things that we've had in the past. There's been many things, and you know, nobody that came in and through the gates really knew what went on in the back, in the back sets, you might say. But the one that comes to mind goes back to when the city at one time came, well, actually, by a guy by the name of Leland Bean came to the city council and wanted to put a dirt track in down there, and our old arena was, including the chutes, were all wood. And it goes back to when I said we almost burnt down the rodeo grounds back in the 40s. But anyway, so they met with Frontier Days, and we conceded and blah, blah, blah. And we were going to be able to put the rodeo on in the center of this thing. And anyway, he built this track and tore out everything we had. So it came down to the rodeo, and all of a sudden we realized that we didn't have any chutes or anything. Well, at that time I'd been on the fair board in Ukiah, and I'd met this fair manager in Petaluma, and they had a whole mess of portable chutes. So I called him up, begged, borrowed, and stole, and Jack Tharp and a crew, and I borrowed trucks, semi-trucks, and went down, and we lifted those chutes up, brought them up here, set them up, put up a wire fence around the arena, and that was our rodeo that year. The next year they did take out the track, which then created a problem because they left a lot of rocks in there, and created a problem for our grounds. And then at that same time, our old wooden grandstands was basically condemned. So the city had granted us some money, so we were building new metal stands that are down there now. And I'll remember we finally got the arena up the best we could. The cowboys are here, the animals are here, the gates are opening, and George Kincaid, who at that time was the building manager, the city building manager, city manager, he and I were still bolting down boards for the grandstands, and the people were coming through the chutes. I said, George, we better hurry. We've already sold these seats. We better get them bolted down.
But
That's
you
happened.
talk about the city. The city has been a great partner to
Exactly.
Frontier Days, you know, and you know, for just going back for as long as you can remember.
The
One of
city
the-
still continues to be a great partner.
So when you were president, Rick, I think it was, that we had a city administrator here for a while that wasn't really fond of this whole organization. And we struggled all the time because our relationship with before that had been great, and since then has been great. But we wanted to prove to them or demonstrate to them the volunteer hours, the materials and stuff that merchants donate, Bob Peters and Buddy Garman, and the equipment and
Schuster's.
the cement from the Willits Ready Mix and the Schusters, all donated equipment and materials to the group, plus all the volunteer hours. And we kept the log that year.
Yeah, we did.
And it added up to something like over $100,000.
Yeah.
And that was a conservative estimate of volunteer time and donated materials
Remember that now.
to this facility. And that's what makes this community really so special. And those lean years when times are tough, that's the only way you can get through those years. Is
Well, and Lee touched on it earlier. This is 100% volunteers. There is not one paid member on any of the board, and as far as I know, there has never been a paid member that's ever taken a salary. And any of the profits are turned back into the city. I know there's been numerous things that have happened. We've helped with the city. We donate. We have a meeting every year that, presently I chair, and we take a portion of the profits that we have to keep a setback money so we can get started with the cost of insurance and everything. But we have a give back meeting, for lack of a better term, and we all the what's the word I'm trying to
Service
think
groups.
of? Service
Service
organizations come and sit down and bring their projects. We frequently fund smoke alarms for the fire department. That's a country. We've donated money to the library. So any of the
Swimming
money,
pool.
swimming pool, lots of community things that are happening.
Plus our scholarships.
Scholarships. The money that comes back into this community is for the community. I've had people say to me, "Well, just how much money do you make at Frontier Days?" And I told my wife many years ago when I was driving back and forth over the hill, I said, we would be money ahead if we just picked a queen contestant and we bought 20 tickets to every event that she's selling and we threw the tickets away. We would be money ahead because my fuel bill was over $1,000 a month driving back and forth.
So I think it was
So-
one of those years that it was 108 on the 4th of July.
Yeah.
It was horrible. I mean, you couldn't stand out on the sidewalk for more than a couple minutes. Nobody would drink beer because it was too hot to drink beer. And we finished the same effort that goes into producing that event, whether you win or you lose, the effort is the same.
Right.
So Monday after the 4th of July, we pour the money on the table, and we did not have enough money to pay all our bills that year.
Yep.
It was the most horrible feeling
Yep.
that we were $16,000, I think, down to not only to pay the bills that we owed, but to have our setback money for the following
Right.
year. And we all looked at each other like, should we just give up? And almost all of you were there that night. And we said, no, we've got to figure out a way and make a plan. And we wrote letters to everybody we owed money to and told them we were formulating a plan, and we would write them a letter every month. And we had spaghetti feeds. We did concessions for high school rodeo. We turned cowboys into cooks. And by February, we had paid all those bills, plus had our setback money back.
And there was a time or two that we felt short, and there was people in the community that
We wrote a letter, pitched in. It was
that lent us money with
Yep.
a no interest loan.
Yep.
Pay us back when you get it.
one of the fundraisers that year was just to send a letter out to the community and say, here's our predicament.
Yeah.
What can you do? And I think we raised $4,000 just by people sending checks. $20, $10.
And I remember living through that, but now what you're talking about, I remember when I was a kid that Frontier Days was having problems, and I'm talking about probably in 1946, 47, 48, somewhere along in there, and I can remember my dad and my mother getting in a hell of an argument because my dad had gone to the bank with the rest of the board of directors and signed a promissory note to borrow money from Bank of Willits for Frontier Days. And my mother had a heart attack. But I think your mom was on that too. I think
She might have been.
they
I
all
don't
signed
remember.
they all signed on the promissory note, and Orville Archer loaned the money. I don't know how much
What
it
an
was, but I do remember that.
But let's get back to the heat and all that. If it was not the effort of Willits Frontier Days putting it on in this community every year, why would you be in Willits?
Right.
And that is, I feel, the most important thing. That dollar, that new dollar, the outside dollar, we trade dollars in the community around to each other, but the outside, the new dollar, comes from out of town. And that new dollar, to get it here, you have to have an attraction. And the attraction is the Frontier Days, the rodeo, the parade, the barbecue. And other than that, that time of year is always so hot, you'd go to the coast or you'd want to go to a lake or somewhere else. But they came here, filled our motels, filled our restaurants and our bars, and brought that new dollar into Willits. Family outside town of town families would come and make it a tradition. A lot of class reunions occur during the barbecue.
Homecoming, it's
It's a good time because everybody comes back that once a year and brings that new dollar.
You know, you talk about that. I'm going to kind of take a different turn here. We talked about things that happened in the back. We've had some unique situations. We've had rodeo stock and actually running right down the street. More than once.
We have.
For the first 15 years of my Frontier Days, I never went to a meeting. That office was taboo. I never went up there. Things happened up there that I just tell me what you wanted me to do, and we would do it in the back. You know, I have a lot of good friends. Your husband's one, Don Nord, who's no longer with us, Jack Tharp, who's no longer with us. And we just do things in the back. And I think one of the first years I ever rode through the parade was one of those 100-degree days. And we were in, I want to think it was LP's, that big giant water truck. I can't remember. It was in somebody's water truck, and there was myself and Don Jerome, and I don't know if Jack was driving. Somebody was driving. We were in the tank going through the parade with this much water, in the water tank with this much water up to here because it was so hot. We rode through the parade in the water truck. So there's been a lot of fun. We're talking about a lot of things. We've had a lot. Everybody's got stories here that could tell about things. And again, years ago there was no ball field, and it was just a wire fence.
Yeah.
And Andy Amsbaugh would come and bring his stock up here and turn it loose, and we'd graze it all down out there. And it was a wing and a prayer that kept those animals in. And every now and then you'd hear the phone call. Hey, guess what? We got bulls up on Commercial Street, or they're at the post office, or they're at the police station. And we'd have rodeos up and down here trying to get them back in. So there's a lot of stories and a lot of history that Frontier Days brings to this little community. And I don't think there's a lot of communities in the state of California that can say that.
I think Marcy's idea when she asked us to do this was obviously because of the COVID-19 situation. The 4th of July events have been canceled this year. All of us were just so sad because it's so much part of our life and it's so much important to the community. And I think our message, I think the intent is they're going to play some of this during the 3rd and the 4th to remind people of what is coming. It's coming. We'll do our ranch rodeo in October, but we will be back next year on the 3rd and the 4th of
We're
July.
not giving up. I'm going to touch just a little bit.
That's why we didn't say it's canceled. It's just postponed.
It's postponed. I was not at that meeting. I had been on the tractor all day long and could hardly walk, so I didn't get up to that meeting, but I was on this. I told Marcy, she called me, and I said, I'm not going to make it. And I said, if I have to. It was a unanimous vote to postpone the Frontier Days. There was from what I understand, it was a very passionate discussion. There's a lot of us, and all of us sitting right here, it's pretty tough to swallow. It's a pretty tough pill to swallow. That you've been doing this for 40 years.
Well, people say it's relaxing. Things are getting better. Restaurants are starting to open. Why? It's a month away. Why can't you do it? A lot of planning goes into these events, and insurance companies and contracts. You can't put it together in a couple of week period of time.
And we had a board meeting Wednesday night, this past Wednesday, and there was a lot of discussion on this same topic. As you know, social distancing, 12-person group, and all of that sort of stuff. One of the toughest things that we talked about was, as bad as this Corona thing has affected us, it's really glad, it's really fortunate that it happened in March and they started closing things down, because if it would have happened at this point in time, Frontier Days would have spent all of their setback money on insurance contracts, rodeo contracts, carnivals, everything else. All that money would be out, and very little of it would come back.
Right.
So it was with heavy heart that everybody said, "Hey, we can't go forward with this. We're going to lick our wounds," and we still lost money. I talked to them last, and we still have tickets that we bought that are dated. We have to redo all the things that have been bought and paid for that have 2020 on them. So all of the saddles, all the buckles, all that stuff that's dated, we now have to spend more money to have that upgraded. As tough as that decision was, it happened at a pretty good time, as best it could be.
Right. One of the things you're talking about, and both you and Kathy hit on this, and just to give the people out there that if they're watching this, just a general idea, if you just in a nutshell, just with the contract for the insurance, the contract for the stock contractor, and our added purses add up to about $38,000, give or take, and that's without buying the beer, buying anything else, paying for the tickets, doing any of the other sponsorships. So,
Advertising.
like he said, if this had happened, we'd have been at least out $38,000 to $40,000. Now, people don't, as they say, why did you not? Why are you not continuing? Well, you just don't pick up the pieces, because these contracts take a long time in negotiation. They're long-term contracts, so you've got to be able to negotiate them. So, like I say, if we'd have been in this position, we'd have probably been out at least $40,000 and probably more. And I also want to hit on something else. Besides you coming out from out of the area, and not out of the area, but out of town to come up and help, you hit on another man, Don Jerome. I'd forgotten about him. Came every year from Lake County, and there was a couple of other people that came from out of town, and I'm trying to remember.
Arizona,
Barbara.
Cloy, and
Cloy,
Barbara.
and they'd come from out of town, out of state, to camp here just to be here on Frontier Days to assist, to help the crew. And so it's not just us local people, it's our friends from outside the area that also have a love for Frontier Days. So anyway, I just wanted to make sure that was out there.
So, do you have a closing? We should probably.
Well, I think
I
that
have a thought. Is that we're going to miss Frontier Days this year, and I
Absolutely.
don't think people are going to realize how much they miss it. But we do have the fact that in just 6 years we're going to have the 100th year, and
Yep.
so we ought to just say that we're going to look forward to the big celebration for 100 years. I remember when it was the 50 years in 1976. Kathy was my secretary. I was a young lawyer, 27 years old, just started my law practice. And I remember thinking, 50 years, boy, that's a long time. But we're coming on 100 years, and so let's look forward to the future, because I think we're going to have a double or triple size celebration.
If you're sitting out there wondering if you can be part of this organization,
Yes.
we're always looking for young, even old, people to help. There's always things to do, not always physical. Sometimes it's in the office. Sometimes it's watering or tending to the flowers of the arena, working at the horse shows. Come join us. It's a lot of fun, and you'll meet people that you'll be friends with the rest of your life.
With the exception, with that being said, Willits Frontier Days board meets on the first Wednesday of every month at the office at the rodeo grounds, and we would welcome new people to come and help us out. And again, it may not be a glamour job. You might get stuck on the end of a paintbrush for a while, but you know what? It all has to be done. Somebody's got to paint. Somebody's got to.
But like Tom
dig.
Sawyer said, that's a lot of fun painting.
Yeah.
It is if Carol Sanders is there.
Right. Yeah. I have
So-
been talking about her daughter. Your daughter comes from back east out here to
Oh, yeah.
help
Yeah.
with the horse show from
Actually,
Wisconsin.
she's coming this year.
Yeah,
Oh, right.
from Wisconsin,
Days.
just to help with the
that's
horse
too bad.
show.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
hopefully.
A pass-
But you get to see her
I
and the
get to see
grandkids.
it. Yeah.
So
Yeah. So, I guess that's about all we
That's
have
it.
to say.
he's gonna edit and clip
Yeah.
Yeah,
out all the bad stuff.
take all the
So by
bad.
the time I take out the legal stuff of the fires, the heightening the water, that'll be about 3 minutes.
But that's all part of it. I mean, it's all part of it. I hate to say it, it's all part of it.
Oh, I didn't even think about that.
So we,
Yeah.